rehabilitation centers. And we need them not only in Mumbai, but most of the cities. So thank you so much. And champions, let's hear it for all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Ketna Mehta and friends of Nina Foundation for speaking from the heart. I'm sure that we have all learned something. It was genuinely an eye-opening and heartwarming experience. A very good afternoon to everyone assembled here. I am Oliver D'Souza, and it is a privilege to compare this public forum on spinal cord injury. We have some big names here today, and I'm sure that everyone will hear some big words as well. But all of us know that only actions are rewarded at the end of the day. And that is what we hope this event will lead to. More awareness, more inspiration, less stigma, and more informed and evidence-based practices. Not only from the top brass, but also from people at the grassroots level. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Dr. Umberto Bazzo. Dr. Bazzo will speak about the current trends in spinal cord injury rehabilitation.
I want to thank, first of all, Dr. Mu, Dr. Nirma, because actually they are allowing me to experience in a sort of human Indian way the spirit of your country. I was extremely surprised. This is my first time in India, and I'm getting a wonderful experience. Thank you. So I want to thank you for inviting me. And I feel embarrassed, and I want to thank Olu for the presentation. I'm sorry if I don't pronounce correctly your name, but maybe, you know, at the end of the day, I will be perfect. And maybe we will become friends. But the bottom line, I feel embarrassed about talking new approaches and management in the rehabilitation of a spinal cord injury, because after all the things that I have listened, which are real, you basically have explained and touched all the elements which I'm going to be talking today. So I don't know if it's going to be redundant, but I will try to emphasize some points. So I want to thank you, because you are our inspiration. But I need to bring you down to what is a little bit the history of spinal cord injury, so that we can understand the dimension of the problem. The first time somebody spoke about the spinal cord injury was in ancient Egypt, 1,600 years prior, BC. And actually, the way he described it, his name was Imhotep, of a gentleman that basically was not able to use his upper extremities and lower extremities and urine dribbling, losing urine. And he said, an ailment not to be treated. And this is the first concept that I want to initiate my talk, the ailment not to be treated. This brings us that I was invited some years ago in Egypt to give a talk to the Pan-Arabic Neurological Society. And I said, well, how can I start my talk? And I decided to collect information, do some review. And so what you see are basically a histogram with information I got that I translated into numbers. And the most important thing is over from 1600 BC up to 19th century, you see a lot of green and a lot of red. And that by itself means that people were talking, describing the spinal cord injury. People were saying the ailment not to be treated. And very little has been done. This brings you that people like you, like me, like anybody in the world, and even important people, Lord Nelson, George Patton, a president of the United States, they become spinal cord injuries. And for them too, the ailment was not to be treated. And they die after a month or a few months after the injury. My background is in neurosurgery, and I became after a rehab doctor. And I have to admit that for me, Harvey Cushing has been an inspiration. But unfortunately, he a little bit deluded me when I read that he said that 80% of the spinal cord injuries before 1950 basically die, and there was nothing to do, an ailment not to be treated. And only the incomplete will have some chance to survive. So, talking about advancements, until we discover the ways of treating infections, the way of using anesthesia, the way of getting into surgery, it took almost more than 3,000 years. Why? How come people during the First World War, due to pressure sores or urine infections, most of them died, and they were not surviving? But we have to thank people that dedicate their time, like Dr. Mu. For him also has been strong listening your words, because you are the word. I mean, even for me, has been a strong word coming from your heart and from your practical experience. And those are the things that really help us to do on work for a better world. And these gentlemen, Donald Monroe and Dr. Goodman, basically were the ones that initiate a way in which the ailment not to be treated be considered by all of us. And finally, what you were trying to advise about having not one spinal cord injury center, but different spinal cord injury centers, then things start working on it. And so we have to thank them, and we don't have to forget them. But 3,500 years to make a spinal cord injury be alive. So this is the problem magnitude when we need to start. And so when you think about all your worries and your preoccupations and all your difficulties that you're finding every single day in your daily living, well, you have to remember that it has taken 3,500 years for you to stay alive. Interesting things have been published. We have here Professor Lisa Harvey, which is the editor from Spinal Cord, and I know that she's have more merits than me to be talking about certain other issues. And probably we all know Dr. DiTuno and his great work in spinal cord injury. And it's impressive that for us, or for the so-called Western world, these things are pretty much not a new chapter, because there is a complete guideline of how to deal with the spinal cord injuries, and this has been published in several editions. So basically, it's supposedly a lesson that some countries know perfectly. So I'm not going to go in detail into this because it's not important, but it's important that you know that there is publications about this. So the important thing instead is this cartoon, according to me. And that's the reason I'm so happy to be part of WFNR. Because basically, when the East meets the West, and this is reality too. So all the feelings that you're giving me are extraordinary, and many things people that live on the West don't understand and don't know exactly. And the reason is because we don't communicate pretty much, and we know very little sometimes. And when you were discussing about incidents, statistics, most of the statistics and incidents that I have been reading for more than 30 years, you know, they come basically from a few countries. Because for the problems that you were mentioning, registration of this spinal cord injury, database collecting. And so these are points that has an importance in what means advancement in the management of rehabilitation. Causes of spinal cord injury are different around the world. It's not true that only motor vehicle accidents or whatever. Each country, according to their own culture, their own attitudes, their own living, you may have influences. For example, in Europe lately, we don't see as much traumatic spinal cord injuries as before. We are elderly people, and we see non-traumatic spinal cord injury. And in the last 2 years, it's 50% non-traumatic and 50% traumatic, pretty much in Italy, for example. This brings us to think about what the World Health Organization talks about, and this is data coming from 2013, and I don't think have changed lately. And the truth is that in high-level, high-income countries, things are pretty much decent. I'm saying decent. In low-income countries, things are different. And absolutely it's true that if in 1940, in 1950, the ailment not to be treated, people die, well, these days, in some countries, people are dying due to spinal cord injuries. And this is a fact. And that emerging countries basically are having difficulties in working with medical complications of spinal cord injury. The effects of the spinal cord injury, when you talk about spasticity, pressure sores, urine infections, well, still is a problem for the emerging countries. Supposedly, they are not such a great problem for Western countries. And in all these cartoons, in these slides, basically, we synthesize what you were saying. That childs have difficult going into school if they are spinal cord injury. That people talking to you, they don't know really how they modulate their voice. They don't know how to look at you, if directly or from above, below, or even some polite people come down to your level and try to interact because they feel that you are deaf. Maybe you don't talk. So in few words, they don't know what's going on, as you said before. There is a misconcept of all this. Plus, even though the incidence is very little, it costs a lot. So it's a real problem for a country. So, all the things that you're talking here, and I am a medical doctor, I like the biological aspect, but I have to admit that in rehabilitation, and this is what I teach the students at the university, that basically we have 3 areas. The biological area, for specialists in this field, the psychobehavioral area, and the social area. And that our work in rehabilitation of spinal cord injuries and even brain injuries is not finished if we are only good making stable the biological part. Because most doctors feel, oh, I'm great because he's surviving, I'm controlling his pressure, I'm doing this, but that's not the end. It's all the other things which are important. And we become important in this field if we get the 3 areas intersecting. And then in this particular situation, then we will understand you and you will not have problems. But that's the truth, the practical truth of dealing with spinal cord injuries. So as you can see, the dimension of the problem too, as for Imhotep and etc., is difficult. It's transcultural. I think so that this organization, East Coast organization, could facilitate this sort of networking. We need to be active and we need to really do things in order to promote laws, to help understand the politicians, who are you? And that people don't be just discriminated because they are sitting on a chair and not properly considered as part of the society in where space and time for you is a little bit higher. It's more. Discussions about neurogenic bladder or neurogenic bowel, who is the first, who is the second? It's an important problem, and it will still be important. And even though there are consortiums and things, one of my colleagues is presenting a poster regarding this aspect on a review about sex, for example. Health organization in the world, they talk about in humanity that health, sexual health is important. And do we talk about this? How do we talk? How we define? There are differences between East and West. Who have done more research? Do we have really programs that face these two? And this brings us to a general situation that probably most of you know, that is not only expecting to live a longer life, it's expecting to live a longer life according to the health problem that you have, to your condition. So the Dale, which has a picture in the world, is different. And the colors basically match the level of expectation of people to believe. And so we need to fight for this, because the disability has an importance into the health and life expectancy. And so that's the reason why we need to face this at a higher level. It cannot be just a group of us who talk between us and understand each other. It has to be at a higher level. So it's important to talk about also quality of life. And there is an aspect too, which I have published in an Italian book in a chapter regarding